Under its inspection provisions, officials from both countries could conduct on-site inspections at designated military facilities. These inspections allowed direct observation of nuclear launch systems and warhead deployments. Alongside physical inspections, both nations exchanged detailed data reports twice every year. These reports included information about the number of deployed warheads, missile transfers, system upgrades, and future deployment plans. Together, these measures reduced suspicion and prevented worst-case assumptions. Because in nuclear strategy, suspicion is not harmless. Suspicion creates preparation. Preparation accelerates reaction. And reaction under nuclear conditions can become irreversible within minutes. On February 5, 2026, that system expired. For the first time since 1972, there is no active treaty limiting the strategic nuclear arsenals of the United States and Russia. The expiration of New START marks the disappearance of the last formal structure controlling the deployment and transparency of nuclear weapons between the world's two largest nuclear powers. The immediate impact is procedural but deeply consequential. Russia is no longer obligated to maintain treaty-based limits on its deployed nuclear systems. The United States no longer receives mandatory notifications about Russian nuclear positioning. The same absence applies in reverse. Both nations retain advanced satellite surveillance networks, but satellite observation cannot fully replace physical inspections or official data exchange. Satellites can detect missile silos and submarine movements, but they cannot confirm internal warhead configurations or operational readiness with complete certainty. That uncertainty introduces a new strategic environment, one defined by reduced transparency and increased speculation. History shows that nuclear conflicts are rarely triggered by deliberate first strikes. Instead, they often become plausible when one side believes an attack may already be underway. Without formal inspection systems, the timeline for verifying or disproving that suspicion becomes dangerously compressed. International reactions to the treaty's expiration have reflected that concern. Global media outlets have described the moment as the beginning of a new and less predictable nuclear era. In Japan, public demonstrations have emerged, particularly among families connected to survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Those bombings remain the only instances where nuclear weapons have been used in warfare. For communities shaped by that history, the removal of nuclear safeguards is not an abstract geopolitical development. It is a reminder of how quickly deterrence can fail. While diplomatic discussions about replacing New START have been raised, the negotiations face a structural obstacle. American policymakers, including senior officials such as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have argued that any future arms control agreement must include China. This position reflects China's rapid expansion of its nuclear capabilities over the past decade. Intelligence assessments suggest that China is increasing both the size and technological sophistication of its nuclear arsenal, positioning itself as a third major nuclear power alongside the United States and Russia. From Washington's perspective, negotiating limitations with Moscow alone may no longer reflect the strategic reality of a multipolar nuclear world. However, expanding arms control agreements to include China introduces complex diplomatic challenges. Beijing has historically maintained a smaller nuclear stockpile compared to Washington and Moscow, and Chinese leadership has shown limited interest in accepting verification frameworks that mirror Cold War-style bilateral treaties. The situation becomes even more complicated when broader participation is considered. If China is formally included, other nuclear-armed states could demand representation as well. India and Pakistan maintain active nuclear deterrence postures shaped by regional security dynamics. North Korea continues to develop its nuclear and missile programs despite international sanctions. Israel, though officially undeclared, is widely believed to possess nuclear capability. Incorporating all nuclear-armed states into a single regulatory structure would require unprecedented levels of trust, transparency, and political compromise. At present, no such global framework exists. From Washington's perspective, negotiating limitations with Moscow alone may no longer reflect the strategic reality of a multipolar nuclear world. However, expanding arms control agreements to include China introduces complex diplomatic challenges. Beijing has historically maintained a smaller nuclear stockpile compared to Washington and Moscow, and Chinese leadership has shown limited interest in accepting verification frameworks that mirror Cold War-style bilateral treaties. The situation becomes even more complicated when broader participation is considered. If China is formally included, other nuclear-armed states could demand representation as well. India and Pakistan maintain active nuclear deterrence postures shaped by regional security dynamics. North Korea continues to develop its nuclear and missile programs despite international sanctions. Israel, though officially undeclared, is widely believed to possess nuclear capability. Incorporating all nuclear-armed states into a single regulatory structure would require unprecedented levels of trust, transparency, and political compromise. At present, no such global framework exists. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has previously indicated support for a trilateral arms control structure involving the United States, Russia, and China. Yet the logistical and political barriers to such an arrangement remain significant. Each country's nuclear doctrine, threat perception, and strategic priorities differ substantially. Even defining equal limitations becomes complicated when arsenals vary in size, delivery technology, and defensive strategy. Meanwhile, the absence of an active treaty means that the nuclear relationship between Washington and Moscow now operates without legally binding transparency mechanisms. Both countries still possess thousands of nuclear warheads, many maintained on high-alert deployment systems designed for rapid launch capability. Military planners on both sides continue to monitor each other closely, but the reliability of shared information has diminished. In strategic terms, the world has entered a phase where nuclear stability depends more heavily on informal deterrence rather than structured accountability. Informal deterrence relies on rational behavior, accurate intelligence interpretation, and uninterrupted communication channels. These variables are inherently fragile, particularly during periods of political confrontation or military crisis. Several defense analysts warn that arms races rarely begin with dramatic announcements. They often begin quietly, through incremental expansion of weapons programs justified as defensive modernization. Without inspection regimes or formal reporting obligations, tracking those expansions becomes increasingly difficult for rival states. That difficulty encourages preemptive counter-expansion, reinforcing a cycle that arms control treaties were originally designed to prevent. The expiration of New START does not automatically increase the number of nuclear weapons overnight. Stockpile growth requires time, resources, and industrial capacity. But the psychological impact of the treaty's absence may begin shaping strategic decisions immediately. Defense planners, no longer constrained by verification commitments, may assume worst-case scenarios when evaluating adversarial capabilities. Those assumptions influence procurement strategies, military budgeting, and deployment doctrines. The consequences extend beyond military calculations. Nuclear stability affects global diplomacy, economic confidence, and alliance structures. Countries under extended nuclear deterrence arrangements, including members of NATO and U.S. security partners in Asia, rely on predictable arms control systems to assess long-term security risks. As transparency diminishes, allied nations may reconsider their own defense postures, potentially accelerating regional military competition. For now, discussions about renewing or redesigning nuclear arms agreements remain uncertain. Diplomatic channels between Washington and Moscow continue to exist, but no finalized framework has replaced New START. Negotiations involving China remain exploratory, with no formal commitment toward multilateral participation. The longer this gap persists, the more normalized the absence of nuclear limitations may become. For more than 50 years, the global nuclear order functioned through layered agreements designed to slow escalation and reduce misinterpretation. That structure has now lost its final operational pillar. The strategic environment that replaces it is still forming, shaped by technological advancements, shifting power balances, and unresolved diplomatic rivalries. The world is not witnessing an immediate nuclear crisis. It is witnessing the removal of a safety mechanism that once made crisis less likely.